I'm Marcus Rehrman, Ranger Marcus on all my socials, just Instagram and YouTube. I used to do TikTok, but TikTok was way too much work for me, so I just went to YouTube. It's so much better.
Hi, how are you? It's nice to meet you.
It was good to meet you as well.
How's it going, Marcus?
I'm good.
I'm Greg. I'm the one that is on that's on Instagram.
Okay, cool.
I'm Brian.
Good to meet you guys. All
I'm
right,
Brian.
Brian,
I run Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue. Been doing it for a long time. Nothing fancy, nothing great, but a lot of fun.
Cool.
So we were, we kind of don't have any kind of script or anything for this particular series. Our last series, we kind of did like bullet pointed questions and stuff like that, and proper introductions and all that. But Greg wants to just kind of do, and I agree with him, just a real basic conversation, telling stories, talking about what we're doing. If a question comes to your mind, feel free to ask, of course. We're gonna probably focus more on asking you a few questions.
Sure.
Obviously you're a guest. It's still, we want that guest interviewee format, but it's going to be more of a fluid conversation. And I'm gonna start with one very important question. And
let's hear the question.
So, in the time that you've spent in nature, what is your best positive story with either a native species close to where you live, or anywhere you might have been finding reptiles regardless? Do you have one story that sticks out in mind?
There's two that I can think of. So
perfect.
I'm from California. I live here in Georgia now. We can get to that later. But when I was in California, one of the species that I looked for a lot was the Sierra newt. And so the Sierra newt is one of those aquatic species that only live in the Sierra Nevada mountains on the east side of California. And so one of the times that I was going out there looking for them, I was on this very busy trail, and I was looking through this pond looking for Sierra newts, and I found a lot of them. And eventually these hikers came up, and they had a lot of kids with them. And so the kids were also looking through the pond. I don't think they were looking for newts necessarily, though. And so when they were looking through this pond, I grabbed one of the newts and I was like, hey, like, this is a Sierra newt. Like, do you guys like want to hold it? And they were just like thrilled with it instantly. Like a little critter that's moving and it's only, 5-6 inches or so, it's going to hook somebody. If you're less than 10 years old, like, you're going to be all about herps after that. That's kind of how I was as a little kid. I was very interested and fascinated by herps. I didn't know what herping was at the time. I was too young for that. But being able to educate those kids and tell those kids all about the Sierra newts was probably one of my biggest things.
Nice.
My other one is last summer I was working in Oregon, and this is as I was developing like what herping was and how to actually do it. And I created my first board line out there, and we can talk about that too. But a board line is just, you place boards or you place sheets of tin out in the place, out in the ecosystem where you think that you could get snakes, salamanders, any types of herps. And so I was placing these boards out there, and I flipped one that was already out there for some reason, and there was a northern rubber boa under it. The northern rubber boa is my favorite snake species in the United States. That's awesome. So I placed a board line out there, and within 3 weeks, I got a rubber boa under one of my boards. And I've heard from a lot of herpers that if you place a board line out there, expect to not see one for months to a year. And I got one within 3 weeks. So that felt, awesome for me, being able to get a snake species that I was very happy to see.
Yeah,
I had just placed it out there. So
it's also a testament to knowing the habitat that you're trying to find the animal in.
Exactly.
Really is a very important part of that equation, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Pretty neat.
Yeah,
also, rubber boas are pretty awesome.
I was actually on your website a little while ago, and I was looking through your photos, and the rubber boas definitely caught my eye.
Yeah.
They're so unique with like the shape of their tail. It kind of like
I
looks
love
like a
those
head.
guys. Yeah. That's their defense mechanism. Is their head and their tail look very, very similar. So when a predator is, about to, let's just say eat a northern rubber boa, a lot of the times it'll go for that tail, and that tail could be, it could cut off eventually, just like an alligator lizard or a fence lizard. It can drop their tail. A snake can't necessarily drop their tail, but if the tail looks like a head, then some sort of predator will go after the tail and not the head, and the snake will be
Right.
fine after that. So you do see a lot of rubber boas with cut off tails. So it looks like a knob almost, instead of coming to a point like most snakes.
Okay. Okay. I would imagine that's it's also a pretty good as a defense mechanism. It gives the snake a chance to turn around and bite. I mean, if it is bitten on the tail, then its head is free to do what it needs to do to defend itself.
With most snakes, they will bite like that. Northern rubber boas, in my opinion, are the most docile snake, at least in the United States. I've never been bit, never been anything with a northern rubber boa. They're so docile. It's like the snake that you got on your neck there, Greg. It's one of those snakes that it's never going to bite. It's never going to do anything with you. And it's one of those snakes that if you're trying to get somebody to be fascinated with snakes, that's the one. Like, here's this snake, just hold it, let it crawl through your hands for a little bit. It's not going to squirm around. It's going to be, it's going to be calm. It's not going to bite. It's a good snake.
That's neat. Very neat.
Yeah.
So what tell us a little bit more, expand on that. This is a herping series. We're talking about outdoor stuff. Expand on that, placing boards out and setting a line and doing it. And, how does that impact the ecosystem? What are you looking to do by placing the board down? I mean, are you creating the microhabitat or is it just, they like to be under it and it's warm or something like that,
Yeah, good question. So board lines and tin sheets are used quite frequently in the herp world, and they're used all the time for surveys. So let's just say you're looking for snakes, for example, which is what you tend to look for when you place board lines. So you have these snakes, and they look for cover just as if they look for cover in natural things, such as logs or down trees, something like that. So if you're placing these boards and placing these sheet tins out there, then the snakes will find this cover and they'll just stay under there. So then as a herper, you'll go and you'll check that board line every once in a while, and hopefully you find snakes under there. So I started doing this in California when I was watching other herp videos on YouTube, and I got to this point where I had an abundance of boards that I wanted to go place out there near Sacramento and Chico, California, which is where I'm from. And then I was placing these boards out there, and I started getting garter snakes and gopher snakes. And it only took me about a couple months. I went to school there. I went to college there. And after you place these board lines, as you're talking about the microhabitat, so instead of using the logs and instead of using the down trees or the holes in the ground, they'll use this cover. And so tin is a very good, it's a very good artificial cover is what they call it here on the East Coast. But on the West Coast, you don't see it as much because it can get really, really hot there, and it's dry heat. So if there's sun just beating down on this tin sheet, then the snakes or whatever other herp isn't going to like that. So on the West Coast, I tend to see that they like boards a lot more. They like the wooden pieces. They're a little bit thicker, so they stay cool underneath, but they can stay a little bit warmer on top.
Gotcha.
If you place that right in the middle of the sun, then it's just going to beat down on it and it's going to be too hot. So the tin out here is used quite frequently because it's not as hot, but you can't place it in direct sun or else snakes won't like that.
Makes total sense. Yeah, I would imagine the metal in direct sunlight out there would get quite warm and
exactly
uninviting for a reptile.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find better luck looking during the day, during the night? But I mean, is there any rhyme or reason to when you go out herping, you personally?
So I think there are 3 different types of herping, in my opinion. One is called road cruising, which is my favorite thing to do. And road cruising is just you find a warm or hot night and you drive on paved roads or dirt roads. And if you just cruise down these roads, hopefully you can find snakes just crossing the road. And so these snakes, they're cold-blooded. So if they find any warm, ground temperature, like paved roads or dirt roads, then you will hopefully see a snake crossing that road. So I've done a lot of road cruising. Like I said, it's my favorite type of road. It's my favorite type of herping. So in California, I mean, there's not much you see in Northern California cruising roads. But you'll see California king snakes, Pacific gopher snakes, and Northern Pacific rattlesnakes. And sometimes you can see garter snakes here and there, depending on where you go. You can also see northern rubber boas. And then in Oregon, there is also not much. You see northern rubber boas. But here on the East Coast, where I am, here in southern Georgia, you can see 30 different snake species in a single night, depending on where you are.
Yeah,
So
it's
the
pretty
road
incredible.
cruising here is better than any place ever, at least here in the United States. And for me, road cruising is my favorite because you just drive on a road for 3-4 hours. Hopefully, you see some snakes, and if you have people with you, you have conversation with them.
Yeah,
you listen to music. That's road cruising for me. So then the other one is flipping, so which we just talked about. So you're flipping tin, you're flipping boards, flipping logs, and that could be good for snakes or salamanders, frogs. So if I'm looking for salamanders specifically, I tend to just flip logs. I flip rocks. So in Oregon, it was really good for salamanders. So you can flip rocks near streams, which, there's streams everywhere in Oregon. So you're just flipping rocks near streams to find salamanders. And then if you're flipping board and tin, you tend to see more snakes, lizards, that type of thing.
Right.
And the third one is just hiking. So if you're just hiking, out here you have sand hills for a big portion of this land. So if you're looking at sand hills, then you're just hiking around. And what we tend to do is we do here at the Orion Society is look for diamondbacks, eastern indigos, and gopher tortoises. And so all of them use the same hibernaculum as the gopher tortoise burrow. So if we're looking at gopher tortoise burrows, then we'll tend to see a lot of those type of species. So you just hike those, and so you just look down a sand hill and find as many gopher tortoises as you can. And these snakes and gopher tortoises will be somewhere around the burrow, most likely. And,
do those three species use those burrows at the same time?
That's a good question. I have never seen that before, but the herpetologist here, Ben, he has seen plenty of that, and I think other herpers here as well. Other people that work here as well. But you could see a gopher tortoise in a burrow, and a gopher tortoise burrow could go down 20 feet, maybe even 30 feet at the deepest. But you can see a gopher tortoise at like 5 feet deep, and then you could move that. Like we kind of probe them, so we use this camera and we stick that camera down. So if you have a gopher tortoise that's 5 feet down, you can move that camera all the way down the hole past the gopher tortoise, and you can see an indigo snake all the way down there. So they can use the same burrow at the same time, which is really cool. Yeah,
that's awesome. We here in New York, our three they all use the same hibernaculum. The timbers, copperheads, and they've now changed their name to Eastern, I believe, rat snake, but I'm still going to call them a black rat snake because I've been doing it for 25 years, and I'll probably never break that habit, unfortunately. But they all use the same. They all use the same hibernaculum as well. That's the only reason I asked, is because I was curious if it's ever been known to see them in the same burrows. But we have regularly, even zoological displays typically house those three species together of snake, and I just it's pretty neat. It's pretty neat how symbiotic the relationships between animals and nature are.
Yeah, and in the herp world, you can see a lot when people flip tin or they flip boards. You can get multiple species of snakes under the same piece, so you can get a snake that may eat another one because that's just what snakes do. So you could find a huge rat snake, but you can also find a copperhead, and you can also find a corn snake under the same piece, of artificial cover. I mean, that's just how nature works.
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Greg, what happened there a minute ago, Greg?
I was the laughing.
Yeah.
So my children's python did a remarkable impersonation of a rock.
Oh yeah,
it just fell off the chair straight to the ground. It forgot that it can hold on.
I heard you go, oh no, and I was like, oh well, I'll have to address that. I didn't want to interrupt Marcus though.
What was, and you said you said there were three types of herping. Did I miss the third one?
Yeah, you were wrangling your pet rock.
Oh.
Hiking was the third one that I said. So you could road cruise for snakes. Yeah. You can flip for snakes and then just hike for them. So you're just, going out there blinded and, hopefully find something.
Yeah, that actually happened to me last weekend.
What were you looking for?
I was looking for anything, which I know could be a mistake, because then you're looking all over the place and not focusing in one area. But I was literally walking in a field along the edge of the woods, and there's also like a creek that runs, right through the edge
Mm-hmm.
of the woods there, right where the uh the um the field and the woods meet. There's a creek, and I found a juvenile ribbon snake,
Okay.
just in the grass, just
Mm-hmm.
soaking up the sun. That was like probably the first 10 minutes I was there, and then the next 3 hours was nothing. So,
Mm-hmm.
which is to be expected, but
Yeah, that's how it happens sometimes. If you're
yeah,
looking for herps, a lot of the times you get skunked, as we call it, where you don't really find anything. But sometimes we call it skunked if you only get like a couple salamanders that weren't really targets. In the herping world, if you have targets, let's just say you're looking for hognose snakes that day, you're going to be in a very specific sort of habitat where you probably wouldn't be looking for salamanders, or you wouldn't be looking for frogs. In that sense, you'd be looking for a very specific species. Just as if you were looking for salamanders, you're probably not looking for eastern diamondbacks at the same time.
yeah. So when you go herping, like obviously seeing, these animals in the wild is fascinating, but
Mm-hmm.
what other like reason? And I think about this for myself. I'm like, well, why am I doing it? Like, I want to find it, and it's awesome, and I think they're beautiful. But like, is there another reason, aside from like the professional
Mm-hmm.
stuff like science, like gathering information for science, but like, I wonder what is the drive to do that? Is it literally just to see them, or is there something else
Mm-hmm.
about it that like kind of grabs us, that kind of like, what's the drive behind that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So once again, I have like another big three here that I've told multiple people. So the first one is just finding a snake. If you find a snake, like there's a deep fascination in just finding snakes. There's such an amazing creature that people will look at them from different point of views. So here in the South, like there are a lot of people that don't have very good point of views of snakes. But then you have the other people that are herpers that are like, wow, snakes are awesome. So the fascination of just finding a snake is really cool. For me, I have two other ones. So the second one is photographing, snakes. I only have an iPhone 14. I feel like I take decent pictures, for having an iPhone 14 compared to, having a camera. But if you are, if you're a good photographer, if you just like photography just in general, you have finding a snake and then photographing the snake. So you have, different point of views, different angles where you can look at the snake. You have a top down view where you're looking straight down at the animal. Field guide shots, the ones that you'll see like in books or online. So you have photography and just finding a snake. And for me, the third one is social media. So if I'm able to take good pictures of finding the snake, then I can post that on social media where other people are like, wow, that is a really cool snake. Like I would dream to see that snake. So a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even last week, me and the rest of the Orion guys here, we found a rainbow snake, which is a pretty uncommon snake to find, especially in the areas that they're supposed to be common, which they really aren't. So I posted that, and people were just going nuts for that. Rainbow snakes are not seen that often. They are an aquatic species. They live underwater. They're not very terrestrial. They're like 95% aquatic or something like that. Which is a very difficult snake to find. And so I have those three where you find the rainbow snake, you take really good pictures of the rainbow snake, and then you can post that on social media where other people can also see that rainbow snake. So I get the motivation from all three of those. But as a herper, just finding a snake is good enough for most people. I like all three though. All three make me happy.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with those. Even the photography aspect of that, because when I go, I take my camera with me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an older It's an older I mean, well, it doesn't matter. It's an older camera. It's not like great, but it's still a DSLR. So like I took a picture with my iPhone, and I also took a picture with the camera. And when I looked at the iPhone picture, I was like, wow, that's a great picture. And then I uploaded the one that I took with the camera, and I was like, wow, that is a great picture. So so there's like an appreciation, or I get more of an appreciation for finding a snake, when I can go home and upload it and see it, and like
it's like finding it twice.
Right. Yeah, and it somewhat it appears to be like better. It looks better from the photo from the camera than it did like to my eyes too, which is like I love that. I like.
I love that. Finding something in nature and using a DSLR is incredibly different than using a cell phone. I do both. I record with both phone and a DSLR as well. And I tell you, the phone does a great job. I mean, I have a S22. It does a great job, but the image quality from a DSLR is just unbeatable. It looks so different. The crispness, the lines, it doesn't look faded or blurry. I use the example of almost like going through a wash too many times sometimes with phones. It depends on your lighting a lot more and things, but it's not as crisp and perfect. It's like the difference between this web camera that I'm using, which is awful because it's built into the computer, versus if I was on my phone, I'd be 1,000 times better than just this webcam, And it's a remarkable thing to snap a million pictures, go home, upload that SD card to your computer, and then go through each one. Like I said, I find that to be finding something twice. I didn't know I got that picture when his tongue was out, or you know what I mean? Like it's even the captive animals that I have that I do that. I'll do 1,000 pictures in a clip, and then go through all of them and find one that's just quintessentially perfect to do it. Yep. Everything's polished when you put it online, right?
So on your website, Marcus, on your website in the gallery, all those photos are taken with your phone?
Yes, every single one of them. So if you go back to like the very early ones, it's probably the iPhone 6. And then I had a very long stretch with my iPhone 10 for like 3 years. And then I'd probably say like the last 6 months or so, I've had an iPhone 14. And that iPhone 10 worked wonders for me. I mean, I would just take other people's like camera shots. I would look at those and kind of like pick which like camera picks I really liked, which angles I really liked. And I would try to demonstrate that with my own iPhone. So if you look at, people that take camera shots, they take a lot of field guide shots. They take, top down shots. I try to do the exact same thing with my phone. I try to get the same angles. It's a little bit more difficult with a phone because you don't, like you said, you don't have like the crispness as the camera. But with the iPhone 14, at least, I'm kind of plugging it a little bit, but that has a really good zoom on it where you can zoom in on an animal. So if I'm taking pictures of venomous snakes, you can't get too close to it. So if I have this really good zoom, I don't have to get close to it anymore. Like I don't have to get as close as I may have used to, where it was like, almost at a dangerous level. Which I don't put myself into now.
The versatility of a phone. The versatility of a phone is, the S22 Ultra has a really remarkable camera system compared to a lot of other phones. I believe the iPhone 14 is very comparable. But the zoom feature to be able to stay, like I went to a zoo a few months ago. I can't remember the name. I think it was the Beardsley Zoo in Connecticut, actually. And I got some really close shots of things that were 15, 20 feet away that I wouldn't have been able to get, because when you zoom with a DSLR, that washes the image completely out. Shallow focus, field of focus is better. But with this phone, for some reason, it's perfect. And I really, I will probably always use this no matter what I do. Regardless of whether I bring a DSLR with me or not, the phone is just too versatile not to. Lighting has to be perfect for the DSLR. I could snap and shoot anything else with the phone, no problem. But if I have you've got that perfect snake basking in the sunlight, that's a DSLR shot all day long. You know, you'll never get the crispness from a phone with that kind of picture. And then all of a sudden, you know, you have a snake under a log. My phone's going to take a better picture than that of that than I am with a DSLR, because I am a completely terrible photographer and have no idea how to use the camera. I have no problem admitting that. It's not an easy thing for me to go from caring for reptiles to understanding technology. Like, that's it. I keep reptiles alive. That's what I do. I don't really do this the technology side of it as much as I want to. Right. You know, I try to keep up on social media, but I schedule it all months in advance and I just let it go, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
So I have a question about your pictures, your photos on the website.
Sure.
Can I use some of those, like photos for, like, you know, during editing?
Yeah, sure, of course. Go ahead.
Or I mean, or if you have them, maybe you can like send them so I don't have to, you know, get them
send
from
them Facebook or email. Because
if there are certain ones that you really like, to use, then let me know which ones and I'll send them to you.
Okay.
Or you can take them straight from that gallery, either one.
Because I'm looking at the one right now it's of a newt, and it's like of its face.
Okay.
Like the face is in focus. It's like really close. And I'm like, wow, that's, you know, that's incredible. So I would love to use that, you know, in this video, you know, when it comes out, have it on there.
Yeah, like in the YouTube thumbnail.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your work with the endangered species, specifically the eastern indigo. One of my volunteers for the rescue actually just did all her paperwork, and over the last 7 months, you know, waiting obviously for federal and state licensing, just acquired a 4-foot male eastern indigo.
Wow.
That's
going to be a big snake.
Absolutely gorgeous, absolutely perfect. I don't know the breeder's name off the top of my head, and I apologize for that, but I wasn't the one doing all of the paperwork. Otherwise, I probably would. But this, you know, I worked with indigos years ago. They are by far one of the smartest snakes that I've ever worked with. And they have a very different interaction. Greg, that's the snake that you got to see at the last expo that you came to in Poughkeepsie. They just have a remarkable way of interacting with both their own surroundings and a person in general. I was wondering if that equates to the wild, and I wonder if that same intelligence is the way they perceive their environment and what they're crawling over and what they're doing. You know, are they just as calculated in captivity as they are in the wild?
Yeah, so I think they're probably one of the smartest snakes in the world. I mean, they're a huge snake, first of all. So you say it's a 4-foot one. I mean, that's only like in year 1 or 2. These snakes can be 7, 8, even 9 feet long at the biggest.
Like, they're monsters.
They're huge snakes. I think they may be the biggest snake in the United States, if I'm not sure.
They are.
They're a huge snake. I've only been able to see one in the wild. I was on an Eastern Indigo survey, and the one that we got was only about 1.5 feet. It was only like this big.
Wow.
And that may not seem like a cool thing, because you want to see that 8-foot indigo snake. Right. But finding a 1.5 foot indigo snake is actually really rare. Apparently, it hasn't been seen in 6 years here on our property, and we do indigo snake surveys all the time. I mean, practically every day. So finding a 1.5 foot indigo snake was a huge deal. But you can see how intelligent they are by using other burrows, like we talked about. They use gopher tortoise burrows. They're practically the king of the sandhill. They can eat anything out there, any snake, probably not other gopher tortoises, but they can eat any snake. They can eat rabbits, they eat rodents, they eat lizards, and they just dominate that area. Yet they are so secretive when trying to find them. They are a very difficult snake to find. They tend to spend a lot of their time underground. So the only time you'll see them is probably like early morning or like maybe late afternoon, because they're a dark snake. They're all black with that black iridescence. So they only have to be out in the sun for about 30 minutes to an hour for them to get any sort of sun exposure that they need for that day.
Right.
But
now, is that enough heat for them for the majority of the rest of the day? If they're only out in the sunlight for that half an hour, 45-minute period, they're pretty good on that chart.
So they're a very temperate snake, where they're not out over 80 not even 85 degrees. Whereas you see a lot of rattlesnakes where they're going to be out in 80 to 90 plus.
Yeah,
so indigo snake surveys usually happen from like November to like March. So they're out during the colder months, which is really interesting for snakes because you don't tend to see snakes like that. Like if you think of salamander season, that's kind of like indigo snake season.
That makes sense.
So I mean that's another plus for them and how they're so tactical. Because if they're out during those months, that means they don't have to
compete.
Yeah, they don't have to compete with the diamondbacks. They don't have to compete with those other large snakes, the rat snakes, or just other racers that are on that same sandhill. They don't have to compete at all with them. So if they're an 8-foot snake, I mean, nothing is going to mess with it. I mean, there's nothing.
From breeding rodents in captivity for many years, I've noticed that as the heat goes up, the rodents' production actually slows down quite substantially. That also gives them a direct advantage to being out and about when rodents would be breeding possibly more in the cooler months of the year as well, to give them a lot more of a food source. That's pretty remarkable. I didn't even think about it. We think about garter snakes as being temperate and cool animals, but it's nice to see that even within a tropical-ish habitat, a much more warm climate, that there is an animal that exists under that same temperate zone. I'm surprised their range isn't farther north, to be honest.
No, it's not. The ones that we see tend to be on sandhills specifically. So if you are just looking around sandhills, they don't go that far north. Georgia is definitely a hot spot, and especially here on the property that we have here, they're specifically a hot spot. But talking about garter snakes, I guess I didn't really give an introduction of like who I am or anything. So
good point.
Like we said, but in 2021, that summer, I worked with giant garter snakes in California, which is also a very, very endangered animal. They have a very small range around the Sacramento area, and their habitat is only small wetlands, which when I was working with USGS with the giant garter snakes, the wetlands were actually made for them. So they weren't there before.
Right.
So before they were just using, the rice fields. So they were using the irrigation canals on the sides of rice fields right next to the Sacramento airport. Very weird range for these garter snakes. So I worked with them for about 6 months or so, very endangered species. But they were almost the opposite of what you tend to think of garter snakes as being like the temperate animal that tends to be in the cold temperatures, where you can see a giant garter snake out and about over 100 degrees, which is, very common.
Oh yeah, that never happened up here.
Yeah, giant garter snakes love the heat. And so if it was anywhere above 90, 95 degrees, like they were out and about swimming in the water, like all up in the reeds. We had cattails over there. And so they were just all hanging out over there.
I have to ask, because I'm very curious, what is the adult size of a giant garter snake? Yeah, so people ask me that question a lot. And because of what we did, we would use like big bucket traps, just like I can't think of the name, but we would just use big bucket traps that we would place like on the side of a creek or side of canal, and then the side of wetlands. And these garter snakes would be funneled into it. But a bucket trap is only so big. So you wouldn't see the giant garter snakes that people tend to think of them. But in old papers, you could see a 5-foot or 6-foot giant garter snake. Wow.
I don't think that ever happens anymore. The biggest one that we saw was like 3.5 foot, which is still like that's
still
a
pretty big garter, yeah.
That's a big garter snake. But I think in old papers, you could see like a 5-foot giant garter snake being a real thing.
That's crazy.
Which is huge. And they have such a small area that they were living in the Central Valley of California, that there used to be plenty of wetland. The Central Valley used to be a huge wetland. And now that wetland area is condensed to such a small area that these giant garter snakes don't have their land that they used to have. So those wetlands that USGS put in have been made specifically for them.
That's a pretty remarkable project.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Perfect.
So why do you know, or can you explain why they don't have those wetlands anymore?
Yeah, so I mean, a big reason is just human development. I mean, human development is growing at such a fast and intense rate that especially where we were looking for them, there were houses right there. So if there was a rice field or a wetland that was right there, the houses were within 100 yards. So the human development is a real thing, especially in that Central Valley. But because of how hot it is in California, and once again, like the rate of how hot it is, just getting in California, that those wetlands start to go away. They start to just turn into,
they naturally dry up. Yeah,
they naturally dry up and they become, a cow pasture, or they become some sort of agricultural field.
right.
So those snake species don't have a home anymore. They have to find some other way to go. So the giant garter snake has become I don't think it's critically endangered, but it's a very endangered species.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I do have an appointment real quick, and I will be right back. Greg, feel free to continue and do what you need to do. Marcus, I'll be right back.
Okay, sounds good. So another thing that I kind of want to talk about was what I did last summer in Oregon. So last summer I worked with the Oregon spotted frog and the Cascade torrent salamander. So that was my second year working with wildlife specifically. I was a tech up there in Corvallis, Oregon. So working with the Oregon spotted frog, also a very endangered, well, both of them were endangered actually, the torrent salamander and the Oregon spotted frog. And so the Oregon spotted frog has a pretty wide range, I would say. But within their little pockets, it was very variable. So you would go to the Cascade Mountains or Southern Oregon, where you would see a lot of these Oregon spotted frogs. And then with the Cascade torrent salamanders, they had a smaller range. But you could still see them, in the Cascade Mountains. But I guess it's a herping series here. So I guess in Oregon, one of the big things that I was looking for was just as many species as I could find. So I could find Oregon spotted frogs, on the days that I was working, Cascade torrent salamanders while I was working. And then you see those giant salamanders, which are really, really cool species. Those can be about 10 inches long, maybe even bigger than that. And you tend to see those really close to creeks, rivers, streams, something like that. So when I had my salamander days, when I was herping for salamanders specifically, giant salamanders were always a big target for me. And Oregon was such a cool place where you could look for them up until June or July. It's one of those places where if you have those rainforests, salamanders are really going to like those rainforests. And so you could flip wrongs, flip locks, get those giant salamanders. And then once it started getting to like July and August, then you start seeing the larval giant salamanders. So they're only about, an inch or two, but you would see them under rocks in the stream, or they would just be swimming in the stream and you could see them. And then in Oregon, one of my biggest herping expeditions, which may be my favorite herping expedition that I've ever done, was I looked for pygmy shorthorn lizards in Central Oregon. And herping is one of those things that if you're really motivated, like you can find some really cool stuff. So I listened to that Ian Breland one and the Christian Cave podcast that you already have. And I remember Ian talking about going to specific places, in Guatemala or Peru, where most people aren't going to go herping. Or if he went to Zimbabwe also. And it's one of those things that if you want a target, like if you want to find something really cool, like you may have to go pretty deep into, that nature or that place you're going to. So this pygmy shorthorn lizard is one of those species that lives high up on mountains, and it's always a hike to get up there. And in Central Oregon, there's really not that much around besides the Cascade Mountains. So if you're looking around the Cascade Mountains, you look for, tall mountains out there. And hopefully you find a pygmy shorthorn lizard. So I remember the first time I found one, I posted a video on my YouTube and Instagram of the first time I found one. And that was probably the biggest smile I've ever had on my YouTube. I think I found 9 pygmy shorthorn lizards that day, and they're only about an inch or two long, but it made me happier than I could ever be. But those days, I think I walked 12 plus miles to get to the top of these mountains. So, I'm walking like 4 miles up to this mountain and 4 miles down. And then there was another one that was about 2 miles up and 2 miles down. So sometimes it's a lot of work to find your targets, herping wise, but in the end, if you find that target that you're really looking for, it makes it completely worth it, even if you're walking 12 miles in a day.
Yeah. And I mean, and I know, and today where I am in Connecticut, it's mostly cloudy. But it's like in the 60s and there's like little breaks of sun. Right. So I know in this area, that's like perfect herping weather. Once it gets like above 75, it's a little more difficult.
Really?
Unless it's cloudy. but for some reason, like the cloudy days are like the ideal days, except last week when it was like perfectly blue, clear skies, and I found that snake basking. But I noticed that going out on cloudy days when it's like 60s and 70s is like, that's ideal up here anyway. I don't know about, I'm sure it's the same in New York.
Yeah.
Here for me, it's a little different. It all depends on the season. So the time of year is when certain things are moving and certain things are doing what they're going to do. Once we get to the dead middle of summer, and it's the last 2 weeks of July, the first 2 weeks of August, unless you're looking for turtles basking, you're probably not going to see a whole lot out there in the middle of the day. But if you go out early in the morning, most of the species that we have around here are trying to warm up. They're just like we spoke about with the Eastern Indigo, where it comes out for a half an hour, 45 minutes in the morning. Same principle. Rat snakes do the same, very, very similar up here with their colorations are very dark. They probably only need about the same amount of time. And it's really hard to catch that sometimes, depending on where you are. I live directly in the Hudson Valley, and our side of the river has, because the river flows north south. One side of the river gets sunrise, the other side of the river gets sunset. So they come out very differently depending on exactly where you're located. It's such a weird thing. Like in Dutchess County, which is opposite me in Ulster County, you have to go herping at a different time. Although here in Ulster County, it's much earlier in the morning. You'll find things pretty quick and easy. It's amazing how animals are so adapted to their environment that even the same species from only 1,000 feet away across the river are literally opposite each other just because of the difference in where the light placement is and so on. It's just incredible to me to see how.
Yeah, we get that type of habitat here in Georgia as well. I mean, we talked about the sandhills a little bit, where you get the sandhill species like the Eastern Indigo, the diamondback, and the gopher tortoise, but you can have something half a mile away where it's flatwoods area, and we have that right here on our property, which is cool to see. The difference between the two, because if you have a flatwood type of area, then you can see different species. Like you'll see more rat snakes. You'll probably see more scarlet king snakes, scarlet snakes, cottonmouths, copperheads, and then you can also get salamander species. So within a half mile to a quarter mile, you can see all these different snake species here in Georgia. That's what I've loved about it so far working here at OREM, is that I can go just down the road here and I can find, like we talked about, 30 different species of herps.
Right.
And unfortunately, you can't get that in a lot of other places here in the United States.
Nope.
Yeah. So speaking of the OREM Society, what I know they're very, they're very prominent in Eastern Indigo conservation. And you talked about, doing what's the word when you're
snake surveying.
Surveys.
Yeah, surveys. Which we could talk about, obviously, the Eastern Indigo more, but what else is the OREM Society, doing besides, Eastern Indigo conservation?
Yeah, so we do a lot of really good work here. I'm not even a snake technician, actually. So I don't even go surveying for snakes every single day. So I'm a land management technician. So most of my job is actually working on prescribed burns and habitat restoration. I do go on snake surveys usually every week or every other week. But I go herping all the time. And the cool thing about being a land management technician is that you see snakes when you're just working out there. Like Georgia is so full of snakes and other herps that you're going to see them no matter what. So the biggest thing that we do is prescribed burns, my job. And so we go out to a lot of landowners or working with Georgia Department of Natural Resources or the Nature Conservancy. And so when we do these prescribed burns, for us, it's usually working on the longleaf pine area. So if we find a burn unit that looks really good for longleaf pine trees, then we tend to burn that area. And if you get that area just right, then indigo snakes, diamondbacks, and gopher tortoises will eventually use that area. So when you see a really nice looking piece of property, like we have a lot here on the property, then we'll burn that area. And then eventually these indigo snakes and all these other species will tend to use that area. So a lot of the times when we find these longleaf trees, we're like, okay, there's probably indigos here, or there's probably gopher tortoise burrows here. But the Orient Society does a lot of prescribed burns, and then the habitat restoration is just like we talked about. It's finding these areas and making it look as good as possible for these herps. And then the other side of it is what most people know, like on social media, is we do the snake surveys, we do all of the snake processing. So we go out and look for these species, and then we do processing just as any other place would, pit tagging, seeing the length of a snake, weight of a snake. And so I'm usually able to do that like once or twice a week, or once a week, once every 2 weeks.
And so when you go out, are you looking for different species, or are you just looking for indigos?
So about a month ago is when we stopped doing indigo specific surveys, but they're in the same area as you tend to see rattlesnakes. So now we're starting to push more for the eastern diamondback rattlesnake as we get into the summer months, because you'll see those more. In the indigo snake, you don't usually see after March. But for some reason, we found 2 after March in April, which doesn't happen that often.
Could that be an indicator of their numbers coming back up, or something along those lines?
It could be. I really hope so. The 2 snakes that have been found, I think, in April, were both not in the greatest shape, which could be a reason why they're still out. Because, that can happen a lot. I think it can happen a lot in the northern states too. If you find a timber rattlesnake that just looks emaciated, it just like that snake should not be outside of a burrow right now. It's probably just looking for a meal before it goes back to brumation. I think indigo snakes tend to do that a lot. It'll find a huge rat or a fairly small sized rabbit, and then it'll eat that and then go into brumation after that. But now we're mostly just looking for the rattlesnakes out there. But on prescribed burns, I'm practically herping out there. I'm looking for snakes while I'm, setting fire to this burn area. And the Orient Society does a really good job of land management along with the snake survey side.
You guys work as a team then, both the land management and the snake survey side. You're both working together to try and that's great. It sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm. So we have 4 technicians here. We have 2 snake survey technicians, and then we have 2 land management technicians, and I'm one of those. And then we have 3 other people that work here. And then even if you're not necessarily like a herper, everybody likes herps here. It's a really cool environment. People that just work here on the preserve are fascinated with herps. So there'll be a night like we look for a rainbow snake, and we'll just text in our group chat, hey, like who wants to go look for rainbow snakes tonight?
That's amazing.
And then everybody's just like, yeah, let's go.
That's so awesome. I wish I could text a bunch of like-minded people to go out looking for snakes today.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
And the good thing about it is that I can either do that, or I can just go to, our house right here and then just go in there and say like, hey, I'm going to go herp today. Like, who wants to come? So whenever we're done with this, I'm going to go on that sand hill and I'm going to go herping today, because it's about 80 degrees or so today with partial clouds, which is really good tin flipping weather. So I'm going to go flip some tin later and hopefully find some snakes out there. A snakes that you tend to see a lot here, at least in Georgia, flipping, is coach whips. And that was one of those things that I didn't get to see a lot in California. I was in Northern California, and the Northern California species of coach whip is very seldom seen. You can see them sort of in the Bay Area, and then there's one little spot in the Sutter Buttes, and that's a very rare species to find there. And I tried for an entire summer to try to find this one coach whip, and I wasn't able to. But then once I got here to Georgia, they're everywhere. I've probably seen like 20 coach whips by now.
Yeah, it's funny. To me, coach whips are like what racers wish they were.
Yep.
Because they're very similar, like in their sort of their kind of head shape and their speed, but the coach whip is like, it's like a notch above. Right.
Coach whips are a little bit faster. In my opinion, they just look cooler. I mean, coach whips are just a really cool looking species. The ones that you get in like Southern California and Arizona are this, really cool pink red coloration. Whereas here you can get ones, even in Florida too, where half of the snake is like a jet black color, and then the back half of the snake is a tan color. So coach whips are a really cool variable species.
Yep, very, very variable. They all across their entire range is it changes drastically.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, do you guys, have you seen with your progress of snake surveys, have you seen increase in numbers of either of the species that you were talking about?
This year has been a pretty good year for herps, especially because we're all, very fascinated with them. And even the people that are doing prescribed burns are also looking for snakes. So we haven't seen an indigo snake on a burn yet, but we've seen at least 5 diamondbacks on just burns in general. So a lot of the times when we're burning these units, snakes will see the fire and they'll get out of the way. They'll get out of that unit. So if we're patrolling, around this burn unit to see, if the fire is like getting out or whatever,
right,
and these snakes will jet across that road, and so we tend to see a lot of snakes that way.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
it is interesting learning about prescribed burns, and like the many benefits that they have for environments. Because like when you, in my mind, my gut like reaction is like, oh my God, look at that. They're burning that,
right.
But after learning a little bit more about it and, researching it, it's like, no, that's, first of all, that happens naturally.
Yeah.
And it's part of how like the earth, kind of regenerates itself, or like gives itself like a boost. Like that's why it happens.
Right.
And to just, to do that, like, I'm trying to think of the word.
It's a very important part of nature.
Yeah. So be able to do that like artificially
anyways.
Sorry, what was that?
I was going to say these places that we're burning would have been burned naturally anyways if there wasn't human development in that area. So us burning this area it's there to help the snakes. So before humans were even around this area, this place was either getting burned by old Native Americans, or it was just getting burned by lightning strike, or something of that nature. Because those things aren't happening in these areas anymore, the prescribed burn is specifically used so that this environment can go back to the way it was.
Yeah. I noticed that too when going out hiking at like a popular like hiking area. Sometimes there'll be like a sign on the trail saying, this area, recently underwent a prescribed burn.
Right.
Blah, 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 whatever. And it is quite fascinating to me. That the whole process of that, it's interesting.
Yeah, we also see a lot of times where we go to a place that we're going to burn a unit, and somebody who's leading that burn will say, oh, that unit right there was burned last year. And we'll look at it and it looks really nice, but it's like, wow, that could use another burn again. So there are places where it needs a lot of burning to get back to where it used to be. Here on the property, though, it looks, exactly how you would want it to. There's wiregrass everywhere. There's longleaf pine trees everywhere. I mean, that's what you want when you're catering to the species that we're catering to.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you keep referencing property. How many acres is this actually set on?
So we have, I think, 3,000 acres. It's 2,700, somewhere around there. So we have 3 tracks here. So we have the south track that I'm on now. We have a middle track and we have a north track. All of those are very pristine sandhill properties that also have, creeks running through them, or flatwood areas where you can see any herp that you'd like to. So if you want to go herping anywhere, around one of these tracks, there are places to go every single place that you go to. So last week we were on the middle. Where were we? Last week we were on the property somewhere, and we found a pine snake, which is one of those ones that you don't get to see that often. You can get those northern ones over kind of where you guys are, but we get the Florida pine snake over here, and that was one of those huge targets for us. Like I probably won't see another one, this year, just because they're so seldom found. And they can also use, these burrows too, just like diamondbacks and eastern indigo snakes. So this one was just cruising along the sandhill as we were doing a diamondback survey. And so there are just so many species that it's even hard to remember how many of them there are, just like walking this property.
Right.
But ownership, we burn a lot for landowners. So these landowners will be like, hey, like I got some longleaf pines, or I got indigo snakes on my property. Like, can you guys burn this so we can make this environment look a lot better? And then we'll do that. We burn for a lot of different landowners, and then we'll also burn for a lot of WMAs as also, which are just the public land.
Right. Whether it's held by city or town or state or what have you.
Exactly.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
What is it just natural growth of common plants, or is this a invasive situation with having to burn frequently, or is this just normal, natural, what it would do in Georgia anyhow? As far as the species of plants that you're specifically looking for, is there like an overgrowth of something that isn't natural in the area that's creating such an issue, or?
Yeah, so there are places where the growth is so unnatural. I don't know if it's invasive necessarily, but if the growth is so unnatural, especially with a few different bush plants and certain trees, so there's certain oak trees that are really just aren't good for that environment. And then there's this bush called a gallberry, which is just not what you want, like on sand hills or longleaf sandhill areas. Like we try to burn that place a little bit hotter than normal. So a cool thing with burning is that you can burn it really easy, where it just kind of backs the fire all the way through, which would just go really slow, wouldn't really kill anything, but it would kill everything that's at a ground level. But if you have these taller trees and you have bushes that are pretty high, then you kind of want to burn it a little bit hot. So you're setting more head fires, and that's killing the plants that you don't want there, such as those gallberries and these oak trees. Which is a really cool concept, but because if you think of just prescribed burning, it's like, oh, you just walk around the whole unit and you just light some fire to it. But a lot of times, if you do that, you're killing the things that you don't actually want to be killed, which is like the longleaf pine. Like you don't want to kill those trees; those are the good trees.
Yeah.
So it's cool looking at a unit and seeing like, oh, like we should burn it this way and this way.
Now, does the Orient Society, do they have like a public kind of facing area, like a building you go into, people, or
if you not here at our property. If you go to the Tiger property, which is in Tiger, Georgia, in northern Georgia, then I think they have like a headquarters, which I think is just like one building, and they have some snakes in there that you can go see. But a lot of times we'll have I think we have like public events sometimes, and we'll have donor events. So if you were to donate to the Orient Society, then you can come out to the property for a day and check out. What we usually do is like a prescribed burn in the morning, and then you can go out and look for snakes in the afternoon, kind of thing, if you were to donate to Orient Society.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and I wonder if there's places like that around me, which I haven't ever researched that. I haven't ever looked it up. Other than state, park rangers, doing stuff like that, but having organizations like the Orient Society around, I've never even thought to look it up, but that's something to think about for people in my area.
Yeah, there's also really other cool places in Florida and Georgia. The Jones Center is a really cool place, where if you're looking to either just walk around, or if you're looking to herp, that place I'm pretty sure is public, where you can just walk around and go about your daily business. But they also have public events where you can go out and go check things out. In Florida, I think they have the Archbold Station, which is also really cool. I haven't been to either of these places. This is just what I've heard and what I've seen from their websites. Yeah. But you can go herp out there, and you can go walk trails and find some really cool stuff.
Yeah,
that's pretty neat.
So I have I guess this was sort of a, towards the end of the conversation question. Which I asked Armin last time, and Brian didn't want it to become a regular thing, so I'm going to do it again. What is your what is one herp that you want to see locally, look to your area that you haven't seen yet, if there are any?
Good question. There Well, I mean, I've done pretty well out here. Like me and the other guys here have done really well in finding the snakes that we wanted to see. We found that rainbow snake. We have found eastern hognose snakes. Found a pine snake. We found some pretty good stuff. Around this area, we have not seen a coral snake, which is a really cool find. We have not seen a mud snake, which is a really cool dark black snake with a red ventral side.
Oh yeah.
They're awesome looking if you can find them. And then a southern hognose snake, which was found by the 2 snake technicians yesterday, actually, but I wasn't around to go see it. But a southern hognose snake, they're not, I wouldn't say they're rare, they're just an uncommon snake. But a lot of times if you're road cruising and you're on a dirt road, then those southern hognose snakes, which are less than a foot long at most, then they'll just be cruising along that sand road, that dirt road there, and you'll find those southern hognose snakes, which are so cool.
Yeah.
Those are probably like the next 3 big snakes that I'd like to see. I'd like to see more pygmy rattlesnakes as well. But herping is one of those things that if you really like it, you want to go to those places that not a lot of people go to, or it's, difficult to go to. My dad really wants to go to Norway, and we have been talking about it, and there are not a lot of herps, in Europe, specifically in those northern 3 countries there, in Sweden, Norway, and Finland. But in those 3 countries, you can get the common European adder there. And I really want to go to Norway to go look for a common European adder, because those things are also super cool. That would be one of the coolest finds I've ever seen. There's a variation of them that is a bright blue color, but then they have this zigzag black patterning on them.
Oh, that's crazy.
And common European adders are just really cool. So I'd like to see them. And I think everybody's dream is to go to Australia and Madagascar too. So eventually, I'd like to go out to those areas. I think the Galapagos would be really cool. I think you have to kind of know somebody to go to the Galapagos. But all 3 of those places would be really cool. I've been to good places already. California is a great place to look for herps. Oregon is, it's pretty good, especially with salamanders, and you can get the pygmy shorthorn lizard, which is very difficult to find. And then here in Georgia, they got everything you can think of. And then I'll probably go down to Florida a few times to find some cool stuff down there. So there's much to be seen.
Now, I have a question. Were you somehow sneaking yourself into our recording with Armin? Because the second part of the question was, what about, in other countries, if you were to go overseas, what do you really want to find? And you just answered that on your own, which was a little creepy.
I was not listening to it. I have not listened to it. Did you guys already post that one on YouTube?
No. That's why I'm so creeped out.
And I'm not really sure. That's just one of those things that herpers like to talk about. Herpers like to go to different countries to find all the different herps there. So Norway is one that I'd like to go to, and then Australia, Madagascar, Galapagos Islands are also big ones too.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's a good plan for the future.
I hope they happen.
Now, everybody wants. I mean, I never would have assumed somebody wanted to go to Norway. That's not in a herp conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's a pretty. I think you're going to be pretty unique in that group. I mean, maybe not after this podcast gets released, but at least for the moment, you're unique in that ideal.
Yeah, there's a biologist out there. I forget his name, but there's a biologist out there that works specifically with adders. And the thing about that area is that you only see adders for about a 3-month period because it's snowing there all the time. So you have to find that little area, and I think it's from March to June or something like that. So they have a very small range of when you can see them, and besides that, it's snowing all the time. But we also really want to go to see the fjords there too, because the fjords are just awesome looking.
Oh yeah. So traveling to Norway is one thing. I just meant in a herp designated conversation is a very strange situation. I would like to go to Norway also, but
I think they only have 3 snakes there. They have the adder there, the common European adder. They have the grass snake, and I think they have the smooth snake. I think that's what it's called. But they only have 3 snake species there, so it's not like you're herping to. It's not like Georgia. It's not the same, type of environment.
Yeah. So I know, right now you're working with the Orient Society, which is awesome. And it's super important. But what do you want to 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what are you working towards? Because obviously you're working towards something. You're, between moving, from
Right.
California to Georgia, like you're working towards something. So where do you see yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, social media has taken me a long ways. If it wasn't for social media, I probably wouldn't even be here. Because the reason I started herping was, finding social media people, and then just getting really interested in herps and getting really interested in herping. So it's taken me a long way, but I'm very fascinated by the conservation side of it. I've worked with giant garter snakes in California, spotted frogs, and torrent salamanders in Oregon, and now I'm working here at Oregon. I love the Oregon Society. I'm only on a temporary position here. It's only a 6 to 7 month position, unfortunately, because they don't burn all year round. You can't burn in July and August. It's just too hot. But there are really good places around here that I can still work, and hopefully I can get back to snake surveying or salamander working full time. So the goal would be to be some sort of herpetologist in that area. I'd like to be a herpetologist. But being able to like post stuff on Instagram is really cool to me also. So I love herping. So it'd be cool to get back to being able to herp on my free time and herp as a job. So I'd like to be able to do that. But working as a land management technician, working on prescribed burns, has been great so far. I see cool herps. You get a light fire for a living, so it's a pretty cool gig.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
It definitely sounds like you have a very good possibility of staying in the area and working with what you want to work with.
Yeah, I really hope so. This area has been great so far. I've only been out here for about 3.5 months, maybe even 4 months, and it's exactly what I wanted.
Good.
Yeah. So is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't talked about yet, or something you want to highlight?
I mean, we went through a lot of herping stuff. Brian, you weren't here when I talked about like Oregon, but there's
I did
really
hear
cool
it. I left you guys on. I just left myself out.
Okay, so I mean, I've seen some really cool stuff. I mean, this is a herping series, so if there's more like herp talk to talk about, but there's some really cool people here that I've not herped with yet. But there are also some cool people that I have herped with. Like I herped with Noah Fields already. That was a pretty big deal for me. But there's some other people that I'd really like to herp with. There's some people down in Florida. There's people in Alabama, up in the Carolinas. So I'd like to herp with all these people. But around this area, herping has been a pretty big deal for me. In California, I have like my group that I herp with, and they're also really cool. In Oregon, one thing about Oregon is you don't get a lot of people that herp. Like there's not a lot of herpers, especially on social media, that you see. I only got to herp with like 5 people there. There's just, first of all, there's not a lot to see. There's not as many snake species as, say Georgia. But I got to look for salamanders a lot with people, and then got to look for the horned lizards there. But I'd like to go back to California and go find some more cool stuff. And then in Georgia, I'd like to herp with some more people. So still big stuff to happen here. I've only been here for like 4 months and found some really cool stuff, most than more people would, or more than most people would.
Right.
But I'd like to go down to Florida, meet some cool people. Much to see.
Yeah, and I noticed that
Awesome.
There's a lot of the drive, I think, and for me too. And I think, I don't know if it's just my personal situation, or my perception, but it seems like we're in my area of the country, at least, in the Northeast, but it's difficult to find groups of people,
right,
in the way that I see from like Georgia and Florida and out west. It's a little bit more difficult, but I get that sense that there's a huge community aspect
to
herping in general. So I definitely like hearing about that, and getting some new ideas, like people talking about besides social media, but like meetups and other kinds of things that are I guess posted out there, that they are public, and I just have never looked. So I definitely like hearing people talking about the different ways that they've, met people and gotten into this. So that's I appreciate, all those insights.
Yeah, if it wasn't for social media, I probably wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in. I found it through social media on the Orient's website, or on the Orient Instagram. So if I wouldn't have seen that, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd probably be, somewhere on the West Coast or something.
Right.
But I've met people specifically through social media to go herping. Like, it's just, the herping community can be really, really cool. Like, you can meet some really cool people that way. And then, if I post a rainbow snake, somebody sees that and it's like, wow, that's such a cool, like, snake species. Like, I can't wait for your YouTube video to come out. Like, I get those comments a lot, and that really motivates me as well to, like, keep going, because, like, people want to see this cool stuff. Like, families have come up to me, or like little kids have come up to me and been like, wow, like, I really like your YouTube, or like, my kid watches your YouTube channel. Like, I get that sometimes, and that's a really cool thing to see. So herping can take you a long ways.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be doing this podcast. We might be doing another podcast possibly, but Brian and I wouldn't be doing this podcast if it weren't for social media.
Yeah,
right.
I originally contacted Brian about starting a rescue, and that was like 2 years ago. And I don't want to do that anymore. But now we're doing this, and I'm like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, this is cool.
And every guest we've had, I've met through social media, which is awesome. Which is incredible. So, I don't know, Brian, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I thought that was a very, very great conversation. I definitely enjoyed learning about sustainable burning or forced burning in necessary situations, endangered species, the whole 9 yards. It's really what we want to bring to light. We all talk about a lot. We talk about pets, and we talk about reptile keeping as a hobby, as people keeping animals in their house. And really specifically, this series is going to be very different. I'd like to talk way more about animals in nature, human impact of what we're doing in nature by comparison, and you, without even being prompted, spoke about all of those things
Cool.
very, very well, I might add.
Yes,
it was a very good thing, because we do a lot of things. We as human beings, we do a lot of things that negatively impact the spaces of nature, and we need to be a little more mindful of that. I think if everybody was a little bit more mindful, we may not have as many endangered species as we have. But Marcus, I really appreciate you coming in and talking to us and hanging out for an hour. It's a great conversation. I look forward to seeing more of you on social media.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, and then we'll put in the when this video is released, we'll put all your info in the bio.
Okay.
So cool. We'll get all that covered, and I really appreciate finally meeting you camera to camera.
Cool.
I don't know. Hopefully maybe someday I'll be able to get down to the Georgia way, and
this is the place to be if you're gonna hurt. This is the place. What's that? This is the place to be if you're gonna hurt.
Yeah,
that's right. All right.
So,
all right, guys.
All right. I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Have a good day. Take care.